Hey everybody, it's your host Brian Hunt. Welcome to another episode of Risk On, Risk Off. Now, those who've been watching this show, we obviously cover risk and all the different facets, whether it be geopolitical or financial. But with my background and my interest, we got a heavy interest in talking about the risks involved with respect to construction and real estate development, and all the things that have to go right and things that can go wrong during this process. And in that sort of vein, I've had the pleasure of being in construction and working with construction clients and seeing that, let's be honest, there is a sort of a old boy mentality that respects to construction as far as how we've done in the past is how we're going to do in the future, be successful. And we all know sort of, construction has very much for the longest time been dominated by males. And maybe say 30, 40 years ago, not necessarily welcoming towards not only females, but other diversity, equity, and inclusion concepts. But fast forward to now, when we're seeing a reduction in the population, reduction in the workforce, baby boomers retiring, declining population growth, there is a need to get additional people into the workforce, and as such, maybe branch out to look to other areas of the economy, of the demographic spectrum to find employees. And as a result, things need to sort of change because you either adapt or you die. And obviously on top of that, just the entire current regulatory litigious society we have, construction can be pulled into a lot of different claims in a lot of lawsuits on based upon, whether it be design defect or slip and falls or just people looking to make a quick buck out of an auto accident. So there's a lot of different ways that construction firms can be impacted by what's going on. And so I couldn't think of a better person to maybe talk about the evolution of the construction sort of mentality, what it was like to try to get your foot in the door back when you're a young female graduate at a Texas Tech law school into where we are now, to probably one of the most authoritative persons in the area that I know with respects to construction law. So I'm very excited to add Tonya Johannsen to the conversation. Tonya, how are you, ma'am?
Hi, I'm doing great. Thank you.
Oh, good. Thanks for having us on the show. I appreciate it. I know you and I had the pleasure of meeting about a year and a half ago and got to know about your background. And when I started thinking about these clients and like people I want to have on this show, you were definitely on the short list. So thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, I'm absolutely delighted to do it. Lawyers, we love to talk about ourselves.
Well, like you were saying off camera, I don't think I've met too many lawyers who are relatively quiet, and so I don't think you can't be a wallflower in that occupation. So
no, you can't be.
Well, Tonya, I mean, obviously, you want to dig into your background and your career and what we're seeing in the legal community these days. But first question I like to ask people is like, if we're playing the old game, where in the world is Carmen Sandiego? Where in the world is Tonya Johannsen today?
Oh, goodness. Well, I grew up in a small town called Portales, New Mexico. It's the peanut basin of the nation because they grow more Valencia peanuts than any other place in the United States. That's what they're known for. And when you drive into the city limits, it says a population of 12,160 nice people and a few old grouches. From there, I went to, and that was true, by the way.
Wow.
And it's mostly, farming and ranching and, then your traditional, bankers and teachers and preachers. So
awesome.
Then from there, I graduated from Eastern New Mexico University, which is also located in Portales. Okay. And I became a school teacher for 4 years. I taught 9th grade English down in a small town called Alice, Texas. I did that because my husband was a football coach and he tried to drag me around to all the different places that he wanted to coach. So after the 4 years, we knew we were going to leave Alice, and we were driving home from a basketball game. And I'd always planned on going to law school. I just hadn't planned on the timing.
Okay.
And I told him in our little Volkswagen that, I think I'm going to go to law school next year. And he goes, yeah, right. I said, no, you misunderstand me. I'm not asking you for your permission. I'm merely informing you
right
to live in the same city where I end up. So I went into the LSAT and got into, I think, 6 different law schools.
Okay.
And went to Texas Tech for a variety of reasons, largely because I thought it was a really good school. I liked what I saw there. It's very, at that point, at least, it was a very like back to basics. You're going to learn all the stuff you need to know to be a lawyer. You know, they didn't have like any underwater basket weaving law classes or anything like that. They had oil and gas and evidence and all those sorts of things, and they were all required. So I liked that about it. And also my family was from around that area. So that was also a draw.
That helps. So kind of build onto that. So you go to Texas Tech Law School. How many of your peers, what percentage of your peers were also female?
At that time in my class, I think about a quarter of us were female. And most of the women in the class, you know, of course, we banded together, and most of the women in the class, or a lot of the women in the class, had the desire to do family law.
Okay.
I would rather poke myself in the eye than do that.
know what your strengths are.
Yeah, no, I just could never see myself doing family law. I think it's a very laudable part of the law, but you know, that all that emotion. I like to fight about money, not kids.
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah, exactly.
So I was one of the few in my class that wanted to do, you know, go to a bigger firm and do commercial law, commercial litigation. And at that point, I hadn't really thought much about construction law.
Okay.
So I clerked at Winstead for 6 weeks and then at another firm for 6 weeks and got an offer from both firms. And Winstead was clearly the winner. Now, what I didn't know, because we had several female clerks, but what I didn't know was that when I accepted the job, I was the only female lawyer in the firm.
Wow.
It was 67 men and me.
Wow. So that's you're breaking some new ground there, coming in as the only female. That's amazing.
Yeah, it was an interesting time, and thankfully the guys I worked with, accepted me pretty readily. Although I did have to listen to a lot of football stories, a lot of hunting exploits and things like that. But that was okay. That was fine. I didn't mind that. I mean, I grew up. My family they were all either preachers or teachers or farmers.
Yeah.
So I had a background that made it okay.
So when you got there, did you immediately get into construction, or was it something that sort of over time you sort of osmosis got into?
Well, here's what happened. I started out doing a lot of financial litigation representing banks.
Mm-hmm.
We remember in the late 80s, early 90s, all the banks were crashing and all these things were going on. So I was very involved in that. But I also, my mentor, so to speak, was a guy named Steve Nelson, who I'm sure you know. He's very well known in the construction area. And he said, I want you to do some construction law cases for me. So I checked into it a little bit. And what I learned is that with construction law, you had a lot of opportunities to actually engage with the clients, which is very important when you're a young lawyer. You have to learn how to do that, and to take depositions and to have, hearings in court. And actually the first case I ever tried was a construction case. So that's kind of what piqued my interest in it. Plus, my husband is a general contractor in the residential arena.
Okay.
So he sometimes doesn't listen to me, and then I charge him $400 an hour.
Well, you should have listened to the first time.
That's right. Yeah. One time he wanted me to vacuum the floor, and I said, I'm happy to do that, but my going rate is $400. It'd be cheaper to get it made.
Fair enough.
As you can tell, I'm sort of on the bold side.
A little bit. So that's an interesting point. So you start off and you're going to construction, and you mentioned the point about getting in front of the clients and interacting with the clients. Yeah, exactly. So which is obviously my role I need to do as well. But back then, when you started, did you get a lot of pushback? Were people accepting of you, or they were doubtful, or how would you describe that sort of initial foray into construction?
Well, it was a lot of the first impressions were and of course I was much younger then, but a lot of the first statements I would hear is that, well, I never ever had a lawyer before that looks like you. And I was like, well, how unfortunate for you. But there were, in reality, extra hurdles as a female that you had to jump over because the men were never really sure if you were going to be tough enough or smart enough or aggressive enough to satisfy them. And so you had to pretty quickly demonstrate that you did know what you were doing and that you were not intimidated by the other side. And, and normally after you sort of jumped over those hurdles, then a lot of them preferred working with me over other people, which went to show how intelligent they were.
Good tip. Good choice. Good taste. Absolutely. Fantastic. So if everybody's sitting there watching the show live, if you, during the course of our conversation, if you'd like to have a question posed to Tonya, please look at the bottom right-hand corner of the LinkedIn profile. You're gonna see my face, and a circle, and there's a box next to it. Please go ahead and type in your question and then press enter. It's gonna pull up on my side, and as long as you keep it appropriate, I'll bring it to Tonya's attention. So, I mean, obviously, you had your initial forays, and you're starting to, win over your clients as far as they sort of prefer you. And you go back to say, those mid '80s, roughly, or today's, and over the time and over say the span of the next 20, 30 years, what were sort of the your observations respects to construction in North Texas, predominantly, or even just throughout Texas, as far as where would you say, when you first got into it, looking back upon it, were maybe some of the, man, I can't believe they did it that way? Or what are some of the evolutions you've seen respects to whether the law or insurance, the claims you've sort of seen on those?
Well, I'm not sure they've changed much over the years.
Okay.
You usually, because I was on the litigation side, the trial side, I was mostly getting the case after the wheels had fallen off. And so you're taking a backward look to see what should have been done differently.
Yeah.
And what I would find is that either there was no contract, or the contract was poorly written, or the contractor that I was representing, or the owner, but normally it was the general contractor, hadn't bothered to read the contract, so he didn't know what his responsibilities to the owner were.
Yeah.
If he knew what his responsibilities to the owner were, he often did not comply with them because he didn't want to make the owner mad. So one of the challenges that I always faced was, for example, you're supposed to give the owner notice within so many days of certain things. And I would make a chart of what the contract really required you to do, the high points, and I would even make like a sample template for when this situation arises. This is the letter you send. This is exactly what you say. All you got to do is just substitute in new names and sign your name. And the pushback I got was, well, that's going to make the owner mad if we start sending all these notices out. And I'm like, well, first of all, turn to the front page of your contract and notice what it's entitled. It says owner's contract with general contractor, which means that the owner has written this contract and he's the one that's telling you that this is what he wants you to do.
Yeah.
So if you get pushback, the thing you say is, well, I'm happy to stop writing these letters, but in order to do that, I need a written amendment from you saying that I no longer have to do this. I got a lot of pushback on things like that because, as you know, in the construction business, a whole lot of it is sort of good old boys and who you've worked with as a subcontractor, a general contractor for years. And it's almost like at some points in time, the people involved would feel like it was a slam on the other side if they actually sent all these notices.
Yeah.
And they don't realize the importance of that until a lawsuit arises. And then all of a sudden they're like, oh wow, it's all based on the fact that you didn't send notices. And so all of that can be mitigated if you can convince your clients to act proactively at the beginning to mitigate the risk. And the way you do that is have good contractual language, good insurance coverage, make sure your insurance coverage matches what is required by the contract. Otherwise, you're kind of out of luck if something happens.
Correct.
And then follow, read your contract and follow and do exactly what it says, unless you get a written amendment from your owner saying you don't have to. I mean, it's really just that simple. If you do those things, it's that simple and that complicated, I should say, because I made it sound easy, but it isn't really that easy. There are a lot of things that are said out on the job site, a lot of things that are put into text messages and emails that if you ever get sued, you're going to be really sorry that you said that, because it's going to get blown up the size of a billboard that you passed by when you're driving down the road, and you're going to get beat across the head with it. So I tried to always caution my clients, don't put anything in a text message or an email that you don't want flashed like on TV, because it will be if you get into a lawsuit. Amen. So those are kind of the pushback points and the points that I always try to bring out with my construction clients. But that was before they were already in litigation. You can't go back and do that over. So it was like, you get them in litigation, you try to get them out of it, and then you try to do sort of training to help them not get into that situation again.
No, and to that point, so obviously your career, you were working with Winstead, and you moved to Aiken Gump. Obviously, doing that for a number of years. Then all of a sudden, I guess maybe someone came a calling, or someone came an interest to say maybe you want to go to the general contractor side. Right.
What happened was, not unlike what happens in the good old boy network. This was sort of the good old girl network happening. But Beck had a general counsel female, and she had taken a job elsewhere, and she was sitting by my sister, who's also an attorney, at a football game where both of their kids were playing for St. Mark's, and she said, golly, I'm just worried. I really want to get somebody good to come in to Beck and handle this, and this person needs to have a certain kind of personality and certain kind of experience and so on. And so my sister said, well, I know the right person. It's my sister, Tonya. And so, I talked to her. Her name was Denise. And I talked to Denise, and she said, yeah, send your resume in and let me see. So I went in for the first interview, and I was told, no, we don't want to hire you. You have tremendous credentials, and you have, good personality. You'd fit in, but we don't want to hire you because you were a trial lawyer and you're just going to want to sue everybody. And I said, well, I'm exactly the person you need to hire, because I know where the pitfalls are and I can keep you out of the problems. Correct. Someone who's only done transactional work doesn't necessarily see the pitfalls. I've lived in the pitfalls for 20 years. So, and of course, ultimately I ended up getting the job and staying there 11 years, really enjoyed it. Right. People there are great. As always, there's a learning curve, and I instituted what I think were a lot of good policies to try to minimize problems for Beck on contracts and insurance.
Well, that's a great point, and that's a good segue as far as a lot of what I try to talk to clients or anyone in general is like, think before you do. Mm-hmm. And then, little ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, because, whether it be business continuity planning or supply chain management, it's not, you don't want to wait for the event to occur, because you got to come up with a better plan. You want to try to mitigate, think about all the angles, and come up with a plan before the event occurs. So from your perspective, from a general contractor perspective, or some of the people who might be watching this, if they're a GC, what are some of the, whether it be a large, firm like Beck or maybe a smaller firm, what are some of the best practices, good, key industry takeaways that people should think about as they look about the risk transfer between the owner into the GC down to the subs? And what are some of your, when you say best practice, people need to think about?
Well, one of the best practices is to never assume that because you've never been sued, that you never will be, because there may come a time when you are. If you've never been sued, then you tend to, I guess, become a little too trusting and not as careful as you should be with your documentation.
Mhm.
Most general contractors, particularly the smaller ones, don't want to spend the money up front to either have a lawyer draft the contract or have a lawyer review the contract that they've been using for 20 years. Well, laws change.
Yep.
Like in 2012, the whole indemnification statute for Texas changed. And a lot of general contractors who are small didn't know that. So whenever they would get into battles in court, their indemnification would be void per the statute.
Would you talk about that real briefly as far as what exactly that happened in 2012?
Yeah, in 2012, before 2012, Texas was arguably what we call broad form indemnity state, which meant that the owner could force the general contractor to indemnify him for all of the negligence on the project, including the owner's own negligence. And that would pass down from general contractor to sub. Well, in 2012, what was called the anti-indemnity statute was passed. And what it really says, it doesn't say it this simply, but if you boil it all down, it says this. It says that the general contractor has a duty to defend, which means you better have your right insurance in place, because it's really your insurance that's going to pay for that defense. So that's really important to make sure you've got that. So you have a duty to defend the owner, no matter what the claim is, even if the claim is that the owner was partially negligent or at fault. Then you get all the way down to either a judgment, an arbitration finding, or a settlement, and there is an apportionment of liability. So the way the statute is now is a general contractor and or a subcontractor cannot be made to pay for the negligence of the owner. You have to defend against that negligence, but you don't have to pay the damage for that negligence. So a simple illustration would be if you were being sued for $1 and the jury comes back or the arbitration panel comes back and says, okay, owner, you were 30% liable, general contractor, you were 50% liable, and subcontractor, the rest of it was your fault. So, the general contractor and the subcontractor would pay their portions, but they're not required to pay the 20% in damages that is attributable to the general. That's to the owner. That's the big change. And then there are a couple of exceptions on a workers' compensation claim. Everyone probably knows that you have a worker who gets injured. He's going to collect damages under his workers' comp. Then he gets kind of a second bite at the apple, because he can then come back and sue the owner for, providing an unsafe workplace or whatever thing he can come up with. So if there is a positive finding in that lawsuit against the owner and for the injured worker, the general contractor is stuck with paying that judgment. So in the workers' comp situation, theoretically, the general contractor might be paying twice for the same thing, which we don't like as general contractors at all. And then the other exemption that people talk about is if you have a patent infringement, you can be held liable for that in its entirety as well. So, that's basically it in a nutshell. But if you don't know about that change and you have the old-fashioned indemnity that is broad indemnity, saying you're going to indemnify me for anything and everything, even if it is my fault, then by the statute, that's void. And that's a bad thing.
That's a bad thing. Yeah, I would say it's a bad thing. Just a reminder, but if you just joined the show recently, if you have a question for Tonya, please look at the bottom right-hand corner of the website you're looking at. You'll see a picture of me in a sort of rectangle next to it. Please go ahead and type in your question there and press enter. And as long as you keep it appropriate, I'll bring it to Tonya's attention. So circle back. We're talking about you were at Beck. Obviously that we meant to comment as far as the change in the statute. So during your time at Beck, obviously you were there. Beck was growing, obviously large firm, and seemed a lot more interest in Dallas overall. Starting to attract capital and different types of owners coming to town. how would you go looking back upon those days? How would you describe those sort of, maybe pre-boom time area?
Oh gosh, I think the first year I was there, one of the very first matters that I handled was out in McKinney, and the company was building a convention center. It was some developers from California, and they had put, I don't know, $8 million in equity in the deal, but they hadn't yet gotten the rest of their construction financing.
Okay.
So they had been offered construction financing, but they were shopping because they thought they could get a better deal. Well, then at that very moment, the bottom fell out of the market, and then they couldn't get any of the construction financing at all, not even at a bad interest rate. They just couldn't get it at all. And I think it was like a $50 million project. So we're hanging out there for like $8 million, and that we hadn't been paid, and consequently our subs hadn't been paid. And then the developer group files for bankruptcy because, and so then we're like, well, how are we ever going to get paid? Well, they filed under Chapter 11, meaning that it's a reorganization. And luckily we were able to, work around some things, and we shared a first lien with the bank that came in and rescued them. And we got paid what's called imperi passu, which means according to a certain percentage that we agreed to. And ultimately, shockingly, we ended up getting paid everything and paying our subs everything. But that was like a 4-year process.
Wow. So,
anytime you dip your toe in litigation. Now, what could Beck have done differently? I would say, and I said to them at the time, you shouldn't have let your billings get that much before you shouldn't have had $8 million hanging out there.
Yeah.
And having not been paid for like 5 or 6 months. But, at that time, everything was going great, and you didn't really think about that stuff. So you can never predict when the bottom's going to fall out. That's what happened. We were lucky. And probably it was the stellar advice of their general counsel that got them out of it.
Probably so. I'd bet the wager.
Actually, it was really a group of a whole bunch of really smart people.
So you were there for about 10 years, or approximately a little bit more, and then you went back into
private practice.
What was the drive for that?
Well, after you had a place for a certain amount of time, at least this has always been my experience, I kind of have a goal of what I want to accomplish. And when I feel like I've done all that I can do, then I'm ready to do something else. Okay. And that's kind of how it was. And so I went first over to a firm that a couple of my friends had started, called Estes Thorne and Carr. Now the name has changed, and I can't get all those names in there. But stayed there about a year and a half. But the whole time I was there, it was in the middle of the pandemic. So it was not. They didn't have a lot of construction law, and my job was to develop construction law business and bring it in. And that was virtually impossible to do during the pandemic years. And so I had made up my mind. Okay, I'm going to have to go somewhere else and do something else, because this is just not working. And I don't want to spend, 5 years doing a development. It was just going to be difficult, and I didn't want to do it. So I just kind of, Canterbury I got a call from a headhunter, and he said, we want someone to come over as partner, and bring X amount of dollars of business, which I had. And I said, well, do you mind if I ask what the firm is? And he said, well, it's a Canterbury firm. And I was like, yes. I mean, there's nobody more well-known than Joe Canterbury in the construction law scene. And all of my partners here are just absolutely stellar attorneys. Fantastic. In every way. And I had actually, when I was at Beck, had actually hired Canterbury on several matters. So I knew what they were all about. And so within probably 2 or 3 weeks, I was over here, and I've been really, really happy, really satisfied with, with all the work and all the people, we have, I think, 11 lawyers, and we're looking to hire a few more.
Okay.
And we're busy, but we're not the kind of busy that it was for me when I first started. Like, I was at Winstead and Aiken Gump from 9 in the morning until 10 at night.
Wow.
And every weekend. And I look back on it now and I think, wow, you were insane. Plus I had two little daughters. And so,
Wow.
I don't know how I did it.
That's my question too. I don't know how you did it either. That's amazing.
Yeah.
I
think that was just crazy.
Well, that's also maybe we'll go back to like there wasn't much saying, let me put it that way. At least you can tell me better than mine. But what I know about law firms back in the day, it's very much you had to put your hours in. It was expected to do that.
Yes.
And I would say maybe you can tell me what later. Has that whole perception changed as far as? It
depends on which strata you're in. If you're at a big firm like a Winstead or an Aiken Gump, I don't know what our requirements are now, but I think they're probably around $2,000 a year. That's what I sort of hear on the streets.
Yeah.
And that's ours are like right at $1,800 for associates, and there's no penalty if you don't hit $1,800. But if you hit $1,800 or $1,850, then we have a formulaic bonus that you get after that. But mostly, we're here at 8 or 9, and most people are gone by 6 or 6:30, and most people are not here on the weekends. Now, some are working remotely, but it's not that kind of pressure that it was at Big Law. I think there's still a lot of pressure at Big Law. You make a huge amount of money as an associate at Big Law. I think you start at like $245 or something like that at Big Law, which is I started at $33,000 at Big Law. So just goes to show you how things have changed.
No doubt. So let's talk about the current atmosphere we're looking into, right, as far as construction and development here in Texas, because it seems like everybody in the planet's coming down here now, and there's lots of projects, and you probably have a lot of clients who probably need your service these days.
Yeah.
How would you, in taking account any changes that have occurred in the legislature, how would you sort of describe the current environment right now with respects to construction and construction law in Texas?
I think construction business is in recovery mode. I think that luckily during the pandemic, it was not as hardly hit as a lot of other businesses were because it was deemed to be an essential service. So at least construction companies could keep doing what they were doing, but they were facing a lot of problems with, how do you comply with what the statutes are telling you to do in terms of, protective mask and all that sort of thing, and having to be six feet apart while you're working. Then there was a big labor shortage. And then, of course, there has been a tremendous problem with supply chain. So I see now, kind of 2 years after we're out of the pandemic mode, I still see the after effects of the labor shortage and the supply chain. It's still, those two things have not yet recovered to the pre-pandemic situation, at least from what I'm seeing. Big projects are being signed up. I think the development is going well. We're getting a lot of big and small projects in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and I think in a lot of other areas. I think Atlanta's doing pretty well. Fort Worth is doing well. Particularly Dallas-Fort Worth, though, because so many corporate entities are moving their headquarters here.
Yeah. And so that's a great point. I'd like to get your opinion on something because on this show, I've had other people talk about, what's the risk, the concern about with construction. I go to conferences, I go to webinars. Labor is a constant concern. And I think, it kind of circles back to, first of all, like when you first came into law and the expectations were, you're putting in these crazy hours on a daily basis because that was the expectation, and you like it or leave it kind of situation. But I think as we saw from the pandemic, and we saw there's declining birth rates in this country. Boomers are retiring. There's a big gap between the people who are leaving and who's going to fill them after that. Mm-hmm. And I would argue as a result, companies and the labor has a little more leverage now, in the sense that, well, no, I really don't want to spend 60 hours a week. I want to do 40 hours a week. And so as a result, I think firms, sectors, even construction have had to be a little more flexible, or at least modernize or get with the times, or find themselves having a hard time getting talent. So obviously with your first getting started, you're like one of the few females in construction, to where we are now, how would you say, if we're looking at a holistic perspective, and we talk about what the trend line is from diversity, equity, inclusion, what are your thoughts respects when you're talking to clients and you're seeing them, maybe the people you've interacted with over the years have changed? Are you seeing firms becoming a little more proactive respects to components of DEI, or do you think they're maybe kind of dragged into it? And what exactly is your sort of opinion on it?
Well, I think initially some of them were dragged into it because it became like the popular catchphrase. Mm-hmm. If you don't have a DEI person or department or whatever, you're behind the times. But having said that, I do think it's had a positive impact. There were at Beck, there were a pretty good number of women in positions of authority, and in like the architecture department. Mm-hmm. There were a fair number of women who had equity in the company, and there were on the construction side, there were women who had important jobs, and then I think now the challenge is to get both men and women of any ethnicity to be trained mm-hmm. to fill in this labor gap. And to do that, I think, I'm trying to remember where this campus is, if it's in Frisco or if it's in McKinney, but what I think it's Collin County has a basically training center, school, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
That is like nuts and bolts of learning how to be a construction laborer, mm-hmm. which we need.
Correct.
And those laborers, they can make a really good living doing that. They're going to be in high demand if mm-hmm. they're well trained, mm-hmm. and if they have a good work ethic. So I think that door has been kicked open for women in all ethnicities, if that's the route they want to go.
Yeah, the facilities in Allen, I know exactly what you're talking about. I remember I drove by it one day. I go, wow, that's a gorgeous college. And then to find out it's actually dedicated to the trades. And I actually have a client that's an adjunct professor there as well, which I hope to have on the show here soon. No, I think you're right. I think at least the market's trying to at least be creative to come up with ways to, or look for different avenues or sources of labor. And as a result, there might be some training involved, because the numbers just don't add up as far as demand and retirement and who's coming down to the pipeline. So, yeah.
Well, and I think also, if you're doing any kind of government projects or some other big corporate projects, they're instituting and have instituted for several years a percentage that you need to meet in having, MBE, mm-hmm. minority business owners working on your project, either as a subcontractor or in some other capacity. And at least when I was at Beck, it was difficult to locate enough of those kind of companies to meet that quota. And so then you just had to prove that you had done due diligence to find those folks, and they just didn't exist. And so I think that is a huge opportunity for growth if you are interested in construction and you're interested in, eventually having your own company and getting certified as a minority business.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a huge opportunity.
No, and I believe so. Even with the infrastructure bill that was passed, that money is starting mm-hmm. to come through the pipeline. My understanding, there is some pretty sizable percentage requirements for minority women-owned business. Exactly. Mm-hmm. So no, I think you're spot on that aspect. Again, everybody, don't be shy. If you have any questions for Tonya, please go ahead and type them in the bottom right corner next to my name. I know you're out there, guys. I can see the metrics, so don't be shy asking a question. Because Tonya's not shy to answer the question. I can guarantee you that. No. So, Tonya, I'm just letting you respect your time, but just kind of, if you think about it, some of our clients who might be out here, people watching this, they're got a small construction firm, or even they're an owner of a firm. Sort of again, the ounce of prevention, pound of cure. What would be some sort of the key thoughts or takeaways you would suggest people need to sort of think about implementing, even at a minimal level, to try to reduce their exposures?
Well, the first thing and the most important thing is get a contract in place. I mean, particularly in the remodeling industry on the residential side, and in the new home build, a lot of these smaller general contractors are used to dealing with owners that they've known for a long time, and they just do everything on a handshake, and which is fine. But if you ever have a problem, which you will at some point, then you have no arrows in your quiver to shoot back at them. You have nothing. You have no indemnification. You don't have any insurance, anything, because you didn't do that stuff. The second, I don't know, I would say co-equally as important as having a contract. And it doesn't have to be, 35 pages long. It just needs to, be simply worded and cover the main points. But you need to talk to a lawyer to find out what those main points are and have the lawyer draft your contract. You're better off to spend $1,000 or $1,500 to get a good, tight contract with your owner and with your subs.
Yeah.
You will never regret it. And then you need to have an insurance specialist who can look at that contract and what is required under the insurance and make sure that you have those things in place.
Yeah.
And make sure if you're the GC, because it's always a flow down provision in there that says whatever the GC has to have in terms of insurance, the subcontractor has to have the same. So a lot of times what I see is that the general contractor may actually have the right insurance, but they are not careful about making their subs have the insurance.
Mm-hmm.
So, those kind of things. It's really just a matter of being proactive to make sure you have the right things in place before you start your job, and then read your contract and know what it says and follow it. And, don't just do everything. If every contract says, if you're going to get a change order, you better get your change order signed before you do the work.
Yeah.
Now, in reality, does that happen? Absolutely not.
No.
Absolutely does not happen. Big or small projects, most of the time, it's like a verbal thing. You end up as a GC writing a change order later. Eventually, the owner probably signs it. But in the real world, if you waited to follow that procedure, a building would never be built.
Yeah.
Forever.
Yeah.
But you still have to know that at the end of the day, that is a risk. And so you have to do what you can, to mitigate that risk, which, it at least means get an email in writing where the owner has instructed you to do this.
Okay.
Yeah,
that's good. And I can't agree with you more strenuously enough as respects to before a GC or construction, they sign the contract, before they do anything, make sure the policy lines up with it, and talk to your broker or your insurance specialist to talk about it. Because if you might have an exclusion on that policy that's going to not provide you coverage for the work you're doing, or you don't have the proper endorsement, and that can be rectified by a couple of emails to the underwriters of the carriers. But once the horse out of the barn, you can't go back in history and get the exclusion removed or the endorsement added. It needs to be proactive and just stop, take a deep breath, and ask a question. So
yeah, exactly. I mean, and a lot of contracts will have a condo exclusion.
Exactly.
If you're building a condominium or a fourplex of a townhome, then you better make sure that you get a rider that says, just for this project, condominiums and townhomes are included. And because if you don't, you're out there working and thinking you're covered by insurance, and you're really not.
Yeah.
I mean, I had a situation like that not too long ago. Luckily, the client did actually have that rider, so it turned out fine.
Yeah.
But that's just you just have to really think about those things, and don't get in such a rush to sign up the client that you forget to take care of yourself. It's kind of like when they tell you on the airplane, if the mask falls down, put it on yourself first before you give it to the kid. It's kind of the same thing in construction. Make sure you get your oxygen mask on first, which is get your right insurance, make sure your coverage lines up with what you're doing on your project, make sure you have a decent contract. I said it doesn't have to be, super, doesn't have to be 50 pages long. Sometimes they are, particularly on bigger projects, but you don't have to have that. You just need something that covers the main points.
And curious, how often would you suggest someone, once they have the contract in place, how often do you think you should be, updated and take a look at, annually?
At least once a year. Okay. And what we try to do is whenever we know that, some new law has been passed in Texas that impacts the construction industry, we try to send like a written alert out to the clients saying, by the way, this has changed, and therefore we need to change this provision of your agreement to say this. Send it to us and we'll make this change for you. But sometimes, the alerts are not, they're not taken seriously, and they should be. So we try to help on that, but I'm sure we don't catch everything.
No.
But I would say at least once a year you need to have it looked at and just sort of blessed once again.
Yeah. And from just kind of as you've seen, you've seen the battle scars, you've seen the litigations occurred on the backside. Retrospectively, are there certain, and especially in this environment, are there recommendations you make to a client to say, everybody's got the GL, the workers' comp, and the auto, but what are your thoughts respects to? And I made this might be a loaded question as far as if there's a firm out there watching this, should they have professional policy? Should they have a pollution policy? Should they have a?
Well, we did at Beck. We had professional policy, we had pollution policy, and we also had what I would call a cyber attack policy. I don't know that's what it's really called, but cyber insurance. That's becoming more and more important because more and more construction companies are being targeted by these hackers, and it can completely disable your ability to run your business. And you're dealing with basically these hoodlums who have got all of your information and won't release it until you pay them a certain amount of money. You can go to the FBI. The FBI can't really do anything about it. I mean, they have a task force, but they can't possibly handle all this stuff. So you've got to have, in my opinion, you've got to have cyber insurance coverage. And we did have all that at Beck. And then, you've got to have some policy that covers you for, losses from business interruption insurance.
Yeah, very good. Very good. Well, Tonya, I kind of come up on the envelope of your time. So one of the things I want to do is always ask, so Tonya, when you're not working, what are you doing?
Well, when I'm not working, I am either nagging at my husband, according to him, or I'm playing with my 3 adorable grandchildren. I have a little granddaughter named Navy, who is 6, a little grandson who's 4 named Briggs, and then a little girl who's 2 named Dutton. And they pretty much get to do whatever they want to when they're with their sonny.
And are they in the area?
Oh yeah, they live in Dallas. Yes.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. Yeah. So you always get to see them, and the holidays are fantastic, I'm sure. So.
And I see them on the weekends, probably, at least for half a day out of one weekend. Usually on Saturday, I'll go over and see them, and they always know I'm bringing a surprise, so they're always very happy to see me. Bribery works.
So, Tonya, this is kind of a more of a lifestyle kind of thing, a culture thing. But you've been here in Dallas for quite some time, and same as me. And you've seen this place grow. I mean, it was a big city, but it's really sort of taken on a major metropolitan kind of feel. We're going to be supposedly be surpassing Chicago by 2030 as the 3rd largest metropolitan area in the country. What are your someone's here watching this and not familiar with Dallas and the evolution that's occurred over the years? How would you sort of describe, not just business culture, but also like just lifestyle culture as far as how Dallas has evolved over the years?
I think it's much easier to live in Dallas than it is in a lot of other metropolitan areas.
I agree.
Even though we have some traffic congestion, it's not nearly as bad as it is in a lot of other cities.
Look at you, Atlanta. Looking at you, Atlanta.
Yeah. Well, I live in Plano, and I used for 20 years, I drove down the tollway all the way downtown where my offices were. And on a good day, it was about 35 minutes. On a bad day, it was whoever knows. Now I think it's probably a little further. It takes a little longer because there's more people, and but everything is sort of growing north, it seems. And it's been interesting to watch that because when I first moved out to Plano, I live in Deerfield, and that was kind of like the end of the world. There was nothing past that, and now that's like nothing. I mean, there's so much more out there now. Frisco, Allen, all. Yeah. So from what I'm hearing, Denton County is the next big boom place. That's going to happen.
No, but, and then also we're seeing development start. Now it's fine because you can't go. It's going so far north, and now south is starting to get attraction as far as South Dallas and Waxahachie in between. Yeah, which is
Yeah, I think
supply and demand.
I think all in all, if I'm going to live in a big city, I'm going to pick Dallas over really any other place I can think of. And I've traveled and stayed for a certain period of time in a lot of different cities. Yeah. And I'm not saying Dallas is without its problems because no city is, but generally speaking, we have enough art and culture here. We have professional athletics and football, basketball, hockey. We have museums. We have many fine, beautiful churches. We have landmarks. I mean, we have a lot of really cool stuff here if you just want to take advantage of it. And it's not overwhelmingly difficult to do that.
And just for maybe last question, do you have a favorite handful of restaurants here in the area you'd recommend?
Oh, my goodness. Well, I live out by Legacy West, and there's one out there called Haystack.
Oh, yeah.
Which I really like. Yep. It's a really good one.
Yep. Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah. I like that one too. Very good. Yeah. Awesome. Tonya, thank you so much for your time. I greatly appreciate you jumping on our conversation. I think it has been a wealth of information for anybody who's, want to know about construction and maybe how to proceed. And obviously you've had an interesting career and very, colorful career. And I would like to say, I haven't met too many lawyers that are afraid of talking. So I greatly appreciate your time.
Oh, absolutely. I'm delighted to do it.
Thank you, Tonya.
All righty. Have a good day.
Bye. So everybody, hope you found that conversation beneficial. Again, Tonya has done this a long time. She's got a lot of history, a lot of stories, a lot of experience. And I think the key takeaway, like we talk about a lot in this concept is, risk, is try to think about it and act on it before you do something. A lot of problems that can be eliminated or mitigated in construction can easily be done just by taking a deep breath, reading the contract, and truly understand what it is you're about to get into. Because again, most times you see a horrible situation occurs on a claim, you find out that the work is being done is excluded on the policy. And that's when you find out the premium you just paid was worthless. So again, I think as we always talk, risk is everywhere. You can't necessarily eliminate everything, but you can definitely take some time and try to understand it and mitigate it and maybe reduce the overall exposure. Like all things, guys, I hope you enjoyed this show. If there's a certain individual or topic you want me to cover, please send me a note through LinkedIn. And going forward, you can subscribe to my YouTube channel where these videos are available for future reference. Until next time, everybody. Thanks.